Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome back to Social Heat, the channel where we turn up the temperature on everything trending. So grab your popcorn, hit that subscribe button, and let's dive into today's fire topic. Someone just dropped Shakur's name like a warning shot, and the silence that followed is screaming louder than any confession ever could. What people thought was locked away in the 1990s, boxed up with memorials and old documentaries, is suddenly breathing again and moving in real time. This week, a lawsuit allegation blew up fast, tied to a private message that uses Shakur not as history, but as proof of power and reach. Right after that, there were sudden non-responses, comments getting shut down, and behavior that feels straight up defensive. At the same time, insiders are circling back to resurfaced interview clips and documentary claims pointing to a $1 million bounty linked to the Vegas shooting, while a key suspect sits locked in with a February 9th, 2026 trial date hanging overhead. Now Suge Knight is back, accusing Snoop Dogg of knowing way too much. Snoop Dogg is calling it lies, and this all stays tangled in death row ownership while Sean Diddy Combs' name pops up again in claims about money, pressure, and control. The official story keeps saying it's all just noise, but the timing feels off, the reactions feel forced, and the fear feels very real right now. If Shakur's legacy is still being used as a quiet warning, then the real consequences haven't even touched down yet. When a name alone can freeze people up, that tells you the story is still active, still dangerous, and far from done. Most people go straight to the clean version, the one that's been replayed so many times it feels official and final. It's neat, familiar, and easy to digest, which is exactly why it stuck around for decades without being challenged. The story everyone knows starts on a late summer night in 1996. A boxing match, a tense moment in a casino lobby, then a drive-by on a Las Vegas street. That version keeps moving because it's simple and keeps blame locked into a small box. It frames everything as street retaliation and bad timing. Nothing deeper, nothing wider. But even inside that polished explanation, the pieces don't sit right and start rubbing against each other fast. The person sitting next to him in the car survives with only minor injuries, while he doesn't. He isn't wearing the protective gear he was known to use. The area is packed, yet no clear eyewitness steps forward. He stays alive for days afterward, long enough for visits, conversations, and quiet arguments over how serious his condition really was. While the public keeps getting told everything is understood and settled, no one is ever officially held responsible. And that silence hits hard. That open gap isn't new at all, but it suddenly matters again because it's the same gap being ripped open by lawsuits, resurfaced statements, and a trial date that drags old versions of the story right back into the spotlight. Once the focus shifts away from the night itself and moves to what happened after, the whole tone flips fast. Hospital accounts start clashing in ways that never fully line up, and those contradictions were never properly smoothed over or explained. Official measurements taken later don't match what friends and collaborators say they personally knew at the time. An autopsy image floats around online for years, with people still arguing whether it's even real or not. The person in charge of the cremation reportedly retires immediately and disappears from public view, which only deepens the questions. None of these details prove anything by themselves, but they refuse to go away because they never get clean answers. They just sit there, waiting for context and pressure. That's why when former associates hint that he was conscious, joking, or even improving days after the shooting, those claims don't fade out. They stick and keep the tension alive. These claims crash straight into the idea that everything followed a clean, predictable medical decline. The longer that clash sits unresolved, the easier it gets for insiders to whisper that the public timeline is more about convenience than accuracy. That's where this stops being just about survival and starts turning into movement, strategy, and quiet decisions made off the record. According to long-running claims that keep resurfacing with fresh pressure, there's talk of a rapid extraction plan already lined up before the shooting even happens. Private aircraft, trusted pilots, and a route designed to move fast and stay invisible, allegedly within hours of leaving the hospital. Barbados shows up in these stories as a waypoint, not a final stop, but a layer of cover before the trail is said to go cold. Cuba is always explained the same way in these accounts. A hit is supposedly active, and staying visible is no longer an option. It sounds like a movie plot at first, until people notice how often the same location comes up from different voices, years apart without coordination. That repetition makes it harder for some to brush off. The speculation gains traction when people point out that his aunt was already living there under political asylum, and locals have claimed they saw a familiar face moving quietly through Havana streets. The rumor survives because it tries to answer a question the official story never closes. If everything was certain, Where did all that certainty disappear to? At the same time these survival theories keep circulating, a much darker set of allegations runs alongside them, moving on a separate track entirely. This version doesn't frame the shooting as something that went wrong, but as a contract that was supposedly carried out as planned. Based on resurfaced interview clips and long-running documentary reporting, a former gang figure described a claimed $1 million bounty. The allegation says the offer targeted both him and the man driving the car that night. According to those accounts, the money was promised but never fully paid, and it was allegedly funneled through intermediaries connected to the music business, not just the street level. For years, those statements sat mostly ignored, collecting dust while the public stuck to simpler explanations. That changes when federal filings and streaming documentaries pull the same claims back into view. What really shifts the pressure now isn't only the accusation itself, but the calendar closing in fast. A trial is scheduled for early February 2026, and suddenly the names mentioned in those old interviews aren't just abstract figures anymore. They're real reputations with real stakes, watching a courtroom date creep closer. The public tension unfolding at the same time only sharpens that edge. Suge Knight, speaking from prison, keeps circling back to the same allegation. He claims Snoop Dogg knew more than he ever admitted, and insists that money was put up to make the problem disappear, a claim that continues to echo as the timeline tightens. Snoop Dogg fires back publicly, brushing the accusations off as bitterness tied to death row ownership, straight up calling them lies and framing it all as revenge talk. On the surface, it plays like two aging rivals tossing shots back and forth. But behind the scenes, industry sources say it feels more like positioning than trash talk. The real question becomes who ends up holding the blame if testimony widens, who looks cooperative when the pressure turns legal, and who starts looking boxed in. This clash matters because it pulls the story out of the past and drops it into the present, where statements can be recorded, replayed, and weighed by people with real authority, not just fans online. One detail from that time refuses to stay quiet and keeps resurfacing for a reason. Snoop Dogg was expected to be in the car that night, and he wasn't. Stories split on why. Some point to a falling out days earlier, tied to loyalty tension and radio comments. Others talk about fear, claiming he later traveled separately, sleeping under blankets and keeping everyday items close for protection. None of these details prove anything on their own, but they add texture and weight to that moment right before everything cracks. People close to the situation say absence can speak louder than presence. When everyone feels calm, plans stay tight. When danger is sensed, people move fast and scatter. The fact that someone so closely linked to the inner circle chose distance right before the shooting becomes one of those details that never gets resolved. It just keeps stacking meaning as time moves forward. As these public clashes keep unfolding, another voice keeps cutting in from the edges, refusing to fade out. These are the people who claim they helped him disappear. One former security figure goes as far as saying he personally took part in a hospital body swap, alleging staff were paid to alter records and move him out of public view altogether. He describes detailed flight manifests, co-pilots, and silent hand signals exchanged between men who later vanished from the story entirely. For years, these claims are brushed off as pure noise, easy to ignore, and easier to mock. Then, after promising to release proof, that same man is reported gone himself in late 2018, and the timing hits hard. Conspiracy circles explode instantly, but behind the scenes, industry insiders quietly tense up. People who've seen how sensitive stories usually get buried know that proof isn't always answered with arguments. A lot of times, it's answered with silence. That silence gets heavier when a civil lawsuit filed years after an alleged private assault includes a chilling line. The accuser claims they were warned to stay quiet, with Shakur's shooting allegedly invoked as an example of what happens when people speak up. That allegation doesn't require anyone to believe every detail. It only requires acknowledging that his name is still being used as leverage. Legal experts point out that claims like this immediately complicate timelines and explanations for long silence. Courts are forced to consider fear as a factor, not agreement. Once that door opens, the impact spreads fast. People start asking why a tragedy from the 1990s still holds enough power to intimidate someone decades later, and who benefits from that reputation staying untouched as February 2026 gets closer. The question now isn't if this story comes back up, it's which version survives once people start talking under oath. When you step back from focusing on one night and start tracing the pattern before and after it, the whole shape of the situation shifts. Long before Vegas, there's already a crack in the foundation and it never fully closes. There's a moment where trust inside the circle collapses and never really gets rebuilt. People close to Shakur say, from that point on, he moves like someone who believes the danger is coordinated, not random. He starts speaking openly about betrayal without naming names, hinting that proof exists but is being held back on purpose. That decision matters more than it sounds. In this world, silence usually isn't about forgiveness. It's about leverage. When someone says something is being kept between me and him, insiders hear that as a warning, not self-control. It signals a balance that only holds as long as both sides know what could be exposed. And this is where part one has to pause, because the pressure is no longer abstract. Tupac Shakur's name is still moving rooms decades later, and that alone says the story never really ended. Snoop Dogg and Sean Diddy Combs aren't just background names anymore, they're part of a present-day reaction cycle where silence, denial, and careful distance all matter. Nothing about this feels random now. The timing feels intentional, the responses feel measured, and the quiet feels strategic. This isn't about proving guilt in one chapter, it's about understanding why Tupac's story still shapes behavior today. Part 2 isn't about rumors or nostalgia, it's about what happens when pressure turns into testimony and silence stops being enough.